Welcome to my 6th class mathematics class, semester 2, ratio and proportion. Today's topic is unitary method. Suppose I have bought two books. I have bought two books for rupees 20. Then what is the cost of one book? Two books for rupees 20. So the cost of one book is equal to 10 rupees 10. How did we write this? Rupees 20 for rupees 20, two books. We got two books. Therefore, half of it is equal to 10. So one book, the cost of one book is equal to 10. Suppose so the cost of three books is equal to the cost of three books. Three books is equal to. So the cost of one book is equal to 10 rupees. We can say easily that the cost of three books is 30 rupees. How did we say? The cost of one book is 10 rupees. Therefore, the cost of three books is 3 into 10. That is equal to 30 rupees. So directly, if we ask, if we say that the cost of two books is 20, what is the cost of three books? We will think for some time. But when we know the cost of one book from this data, the cost of one book is 10 rupees, the cost of three books is 30 rupees. The cost of five books is 5 into 10, 50 rupees. Like that we can say. This is called the unitary method. That is finding the cost or whatever it may be for one unit and calculating the other for any number of books or whatever it may be. Finding the result is called the unitary method. First finding the cost of one item, then finding the cost of several items is called the unitary method. In this method, the cost of two books, the cost of two books is 20 rupees. The cost of two books is 20 rupees. Therefore, the cost of one book is equal to rupees 20 divided by 2. That is equal to rupees 10. Then the cost of three books is equal to rupees 10. The cost of one book into number of books we want. So rupees 10 into 30 is rupees 30. Similarly, we can find the cost of any number of books. Suppose the cost of 7 books is equal to rupees 10, the cost of one book into 7. 10 into 7, 70. Therefore, rupees 70. The cost of 7 books is equal to rupees 70. Take the second example. A scooter requires 2 liters of petrol to cover 80 km. How many liters of petrol is required to cover 1 kilometer? So, with 80 kilometers, with 80 kilometers of distance is covered with 2 liters of petrol. Therefore, for 1 kilometer, it requires 2 by 80 liters. So, to travel 80 kilometers, 2 liters of petrol is required. It requires 2 liters of petrol. So, to travel 1 kilometer, it requires 2 liters by 80 or 2 ones to 2 40s. Let it be as it is, 1 by 40 liter. So, to travel 1 kilometer, it requires 1 by 40 liter. So, if you want any number of kilometers of distance, suppose to travel 30 kilometers, how much of petrol is required? To travel 30 kilometers. To travel 1 kilometer, it requires 1 by 40 liter. Therefore, to travel 30 kilometers, it requires 1 by 40 into 30 liter. That is equal to 3 by 4 liter or 354, 3/4 can be written as 0.75 liter. So thus we calculate the amount of petrol required to travel 1 kilometer first. Then we calculated the amount of petrol required to travel 30 kilometers. Thus calculating the unit, this method is called a unit. Calculating per unit, then calculating the amount, how much, that means multiplying with a number, which is whatever then. So in the previous method we have calculated the cost of 1 rupee first, the cost of 1 book first, then calculated the cost of 3 books. So the cost of 1 book is 10 rupees, the cost of 3 books is 10 into 3. Similarly here the amount of petrol required to travel 1 kilometer is this distance, 2 by 80 or 1 by 40. So amount of petrol required to travel 30 kilometers is equal to 30 times to this, 1 by 40 into 30, that is equal to 3 by 4 liter or 0.75 liter. So this method is called the unitary method. The method in which finding the value of 1 unit and then the value of required number of units is known as unitary method. Coming to the next example, distance travelled by Karan in 2 hours is 8 kilometers. Find the distance travelled in 1 hour and in 4 hours. So distance travelled by Karan in 2 hours is 8 kilometers. So distance travelled by Karan in 2 hours is equal to 8 kilometers. So first we will find the distance covered in 1 hour is equal to, in 2 hours 8 kilometers. Therefore in 1 hour 8 by 2, that is equal to 4 kilometers. Therefore distance travelled by Karan in 1 hour is equal to 8 by 2, that is equal to 4 kilometers. Therefore distance travelled in 4 hours, distance travelled in 4 hours is equal to, in 1 hour it travels 4 kilometers. So in 4 hours it travels 4 kilometers into 4, 16 kilometers. Thus it is the unitary method. We have first calculated this distance travelled per unit time or per 1 hour, in 1 hour. Then we calculated the distance travelled in 4 kilometers. Thus we can calculate the distance travelled in whatever time, 5 kilometers, 5 hours, 6 hours or 5.5 hours, 8 hours, 10 hours, like that. So next example, a motorbike travels 220 kilometers with 5 liters of petrol. 220 kilometers with 5 liters of petrol. How much will it cover with 1.5 liter of petrol? So with 5 liters of petrol, the distance travelled by the motorbike with 5 liters, the distance travelled by the distance covered by the motorbike is equal to 220 kilometers. So with 5 liters of petrol, the distance covered by the motorbike is 220 kilometers. Therefore with 1 liter of petrol, the distance is equal to 220 by 5 kilometers. So with 5 liters it covers 220. Therefore with 1 liter it covers 220 by 5. We can cancel it. 5 ones, 5 fours 20, 20, 5 fours 20 is equal to 44 kilometers. So with 1 liter of petrol it covers 44 kilometers. So with 1.5 liter of petrol, with 1.5 liter of petrol, the distance covered by the motorbike is equal to 44 kilometer for 1 liter. So for 1.5 liter, 44 into 1.5. So I will multiply it. 5 fours 20. 5 fours 20 plus 2, 22. Next 1 4 4, 1 4 4. So 0 6 6. As it is a decimal point from one digit after from the right, after one digit from the right, we will put here 66.6. Thus, therefore, the product is 66 kilometer. So, with 1.5 liter of petrol, the distance covered by the motorbike is 66 kilometer. So, with 5 liters, it travels 220 kilometers. So, with 1 liter of petrol, it travels 44 kilometers. With 1.5 liter of petrol, it travels 66 kilometers. Next example, the cost of 105 envelopes is rupees 350. How many envelopes can be purchased for rupees 100? So for rupees 350, we get 105 envelopes. Therefore, we have to find the number of envelopes for 1 rupee. Then we will calculate the number of envelopes we get for rupees 100. Therefore, for rupees 350, the number of envelopes we get is equal to 105. So for rupee 1, the number of envelopes we get is equal to 105 by 350. So for rupees 100, the number of envelopes we get is equal to 105 by 350. That is number of envelopes we get for 1 rupee into 100. Number of envelopes we get for 100 rupees. So simplifying it, 0 0 gets cancelled, 5 2s 10, 5 7s 35. That is equal to 105 also divided by 7. 7 1s 7, 3 remains, 3 5 35, 7 5s 35. So 7 15s 100, 15 2s 30. Therefore, we get 30 envelopes for rupees 100. So coming to the next example, a car travels 90 kilometers in 2.5 hours. So first question, how much time is required to cover 30 kilometers? Second question, find the distance covered in 2 hours with the same speed. So first question is, how much time is required to cover 30 kilometers? So it takes 2.5 hours to cover 90 kilometers. So we have to find out the time required to cover 1 kilometer. So time required to cover 90 kilometers is equal to 2.5 hours. So time required to cover 1 kilometer is equal to 2.5 hours by 90. So 2.5 can be written as 2.5 by 90 hours. So time required to cover 1 kilometer is equal to 2.5 by 90, because time required to cover 90 kilometers is 2.5 hours. Therefore 1 kilometer is 2.5 by 90. Therefore, how much time is required to cover 30 kilometers? So time required to cover 30 kilometers. So for 1 kilometer time is this much. So for 30 kilometers the time is 2.5 by 90 into 30 hours. So 33 is 90. 0 0 33 is 90. Therefore 2.5 by 3 hours. Or we can convert it into minutes. 2.5 into 1 hour is equal to 60 minutes by 3. So 3 2 6 2 0. So multiplying it will get 0 For 0 we will take 0, 2 5s 10, no, 1 is there, 2 2s 4, plus 1 5. As there is a decimal point after one digit, we put the decimal point here, 50 minutes. 50 minutes. So time required to cover 30 kilometers is equal to 50 minutes. Okay. So coming to the second question, find the distance covered in 2 hours. So here the distance covered in 2.5 hours is 90. So distance covers in 1 hour is equal to 90 by 2.5. Then distance covered in 2 hours is equal to 90 by 2.5 into 2. That distance covered in 2 hours. Here the distance covered in 2.5 hours. So we will write 2.5 for 2.5 hours is equal to 90 kilometers. Therefore distance covered in 1 hour is equal to 90 by 2.5 kilometers. Therefore distance covered in 2 hours is equal to 90 by 2.5 into 2. 90 by 2.5 into 2. That is equal to, just multiply it, 2 9s 18, 0 by 2.5. 180 by 2.5. Or multiplying both numerator and denominator by 10. 180 into 10 by 2.5 into 10. That is equal to 1800 by 25. 1800 by 25. Still simplifying. 1800 by 25. If we multiply 25 by 4, we get 100. Therefore, to simplify, we will multiply both numerator and denominator by 4. That is 1800 into 4 by 25 into 4. That is equal to 1800 into 4 by 25 into 100. 25 into 4 is 100. So 2 zeros. That is equal to 18 fours. 18 fours is equal to 72. 72. What is this? Distance covered in 2 hours, kilometers. So 72 kilometers. Distance covered in 2 kilometers. Here distance covered in 2.5 hours is 90 kilometers. Distance covered in 2 hours is 72 kilometers.